2 for 29. The Bulls shot 2 for 29 from the three-point line against the worst defensive team in the NBA, the worst team in the NBA by record, and they were held to under 100 points against said team in the Detroit Pistons. Now, I don't want to dismiss the Pistons and the effort they displayed tonight. Give them credit for the way they showed up after having two heartbreaking losses, one being last night against the Knicks in a game they should have won after a very bad call in the final play of the game. But even though the Pistons have been playing a lot better recently, this is still a team that has only won 8 games all season going into tonight. A team that is very young, inexperienced, and a team that lost 28 straight games earlier in the year. You can't lose to a team like that, not at home, and especially when you have arguably the toughest stretch of games ahead of you, taking on the Cavs tomorrow, then the Bucks, then going out west against the Kings, Jazz, Warriors, and Clippers. Like, nah, I don't care how you slice it. I don't care if this was just a bad shooting night, an outlier of a game. This was an embarrassing loss and an embarrassing effort from the Bulls in what is probably the worst loss of the season. The first being the last time they played the Pistons and lost to them, which is just comical that the 9 games the Pistons have won, 2 of them are against the Bulls. Just absurd. Now look, I get that the Bulls are not going to shoot like that every night. In fact, they've never shot the ball that poorly this season, 7% from 3. I feel like no team has probably shot the 3 ball that bad this year. And yes, if the Bulls even shot 30% from 3 tonight, which is still below average, that completely changes the outcome of the game and the Bulls probably win. And if we're being honest, some of those shots were actually good looks. They were generating these shots with great ball movement and moving around screens, making the extra pass. But what bothered me is the Bulls continued to chuck up threes even though they were ice cold. They weren't going with what works, or at least what was working in this game in the first half. They weren't attacking the basket. They weren't feeding it into Vucevic. They weren't effectively cutting to the basket on the inside. They weren't doing what was working well to an extent, but was just in the first half, despite the 3 ball not going down. And the poor shooting aside, because again, sometimes bad shooting nights happen. But where was the effort? Where was the urgency? You're playing against the worst team in the league in a game you need to win, a team that just played last night in New York, and this is how you showed up, taking your opponent lightly. Let's just keep jacking up threes and then not hustling back on defense and just fouling them in frustration because you got beat on the other end. Like, what is that? Look, I get that you're fatigued. I get that it's a long season and you're shorthanded, but you're a professional basketball team. Come ready to play. And it's funny too because this is coming off of a night where the Bulls had one of the better wins of their season in a gutsy effort against the New Orleans Pelicans in New Orleans. Just such an inconsistent team with inconsistent effort from the Bulls. It's why continuity is not everything. Now, while I know we like to overreact to a single game as we do on this channel, we think the Bulls are turning things around when they beat a team like the Pelicans, and then we quickly do an about face when they lose to the Pelicans and it's doomsday all over again. And overreacting to a single game aside, there have been some things that have been concerning to me that have more or less started to become a trend recently. One of them is Coby White. Coby has been in quite a bit of a slump since the All-Star break, and actually really before the All-Star break, really the last 5 or 6 games. Of course, he's playing like this after I did a video on how he was a lock on the most improved player of the year. Hasn't really been selling that ever since. And while I get fatigue has to be a factor, he's never been playing these kind of minutes before in his entire career. The way he's been playing as of late is cause for concern, where you go back to some of his previous seasons where we talked about how he was the most inconsistent player in the league. And we joked about how this season he's finally started to show up consistently well and impacting the game in so many ways, even outside of just scoring. But over the last 5 or so games, it's almost like we've seen the old Coby White. Now, I will say one big difference is Coby has been able to impact the game in other ways when his shots aren't falling. But because Coby is a subpar defender, he tries, but he's not a good defender, and it's not like he has elite level court vision or on-ball creation, so when that shot isn't falling, it impacts the Bulls greatly, especially when he's now become the Bulls' second scoring option. Over his last 5 games, Coby is shooting 14 for 47 from 3. Sorry, over his last 6 games. That's just shy of 30%. He hasn't really been shooting the ball well from the field as a whole either. Hasn't been as effective in finishing at the rim. Teams are starting to pay close attention in how he attacks the basket. He's either getting rejected at the rim or he's heavily contested and making it a very difficult shot. And what had me a little more concerned in the game tonight was the fact that Coby looked like he was trying to force things too much. Like, it reminded me of Zach and DeMar at times, when their shots weren't falling and they would just keep forcing the issue until they got their scoring numbers up to not negatively impact their stats. Coby tonight, 2 for 14, 0 for 5 from 3, 10 points, a minus 15 on the floor. A non-factor tonight for the Bulls when the Bulls so desperately needed his offense. The other thing that had me concerned, DeMar is getting tired. I mean, those minutes are catching up to him. He was great in the first half. I believe he was, 7 for 7, didn't miss a single shot at halftime. Second half, went 2 for 9. Still finished with 25 points on 9 for 16 overall, but you can tell in the second half of games, in the last few contests the Bulls have had, he's coming out much more slowly and walking the ball up way too frequently for a team that already has the slowest pace in the league and desperately needs to keep pushing the ball to be effective and successful. I mean, really the only two players who showed up well in this game were Vucevic and Andre Drummond. I would argue Vucevic's stat line was a bit inflated because he was really bad on the defensive end in the paint and finished the game a -21, which was a team low when he was on the court. But it is telling that you had both of the Bulls bigs who were on the court at various times together. Both of them had monster games on offense. Vucevic puts up 25 and 10, 12 for 23 from the floor, Drummond 20 and 11, 9 for 14, and yet the Bulls kept chucking up threes when they wouldn't go down. Caruso had a good game as well, even though his shots weren't falling and he went 0 for 5 from deep, he was a monster on defense, as he always is, pestering Cade Cunningham, 5 steals in only 25 minutes, as he had to leave the game for some time after tweaking that ankle on the fall, although they were saying it was a hamstring injury on the broadcast. But yeah, aside from those guys, nobody had an exceptional game. When your 3 guards, your 3 best shooting guards, go 0 for 15 from 3, you know it's going to be a long night and a tough game to try and win. It's honestly shocking the Bulls were actually able to keep it this close when they hit 2 threes all night, shooting 7% from downtown. What's funny is that their only 2 threes that were made came from Nikola Vucevic and Dalen Terry, 2 of their worst 3-point shooters. Can't make this stuff up. Also, my God, Javon Carter. Him coming in for Alex Caruso, smoking layups and more or less airballing threes for one-and-done possessions. Yikes. Things are just looking worse and worse for that guy and what was thought to be a big free agency signing for the Bulls. Man, also the Bulls had 40 points in the second half against the Pistons. Gross. Like I said, it's not going to get any easier for the Bulls these next few games. I can't say with confidence that they're going to win any of them. I hope they beat the Warriors since I'll be at that game, but the Bulls don't have a good track record when they come out west, so we'll see what happens. To make matters worse, the Hawks are actually playing better without Trae Young, and the Bulls are only 1 game ahead of Atlanta right now for 10th in the Eastern Conference. Continuity, baby. Anyway, let me know what your guys' thoughts were on this game. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.